Okay, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into a story that's, well, it's a bit of a doozy.
Oh, yeah.
It's a story about power, faith, rebellion.
And a guy who really didn't like paying for sins, basically.
Well, there is that. We're talking, of course, about Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation.
A period that, let's be honest, gets a little oversimplified in the history books.
Right, like it's just bam, corrupt church, fat monks, Luther shows up, and everything changes.
Exactly. But it's way more complicated and way more interesting than that.
Okay, so to really understand Luther and the world he turned upside down, what do we need to grasp first?
Well, first of all, we've got this incredible resource to help us unpack all of this.
Yes, a fantastic discussion between two historians from the podcast, The Rest is History.
A real deep dive into the context and the personalities that shaped this era.
Exactly. And our mission, should we choose to accept it,
Always.
is to distill all that juicy historical goodness and, well, make it relevant to, us folks living in the 21st century.
Because believe it or not, this stuff still matters today in ways you might not even realize.
Right. So let's rewind the clock back to the year 1500.
Okay, picture this. Europe's a bit of a mess.
Yeah, plagues, wars, empires crumbling.
And this constant underlying dread that the world's about to end. Sound familiar?
Yeah, kind of hits close to home these days. So this is the world Martin Luther is born into.
Right, and that's key, because we tend to picture the church he was rebelling against as this, static thing, always corrupt, always waiting for someone to come along and shake things up.
But that's not the whole story, is it?
Not even close. About 100 years before Luther, there was this huge Reformation, the 11th century Reformation, that completely changed the game for the church.
Reformation before the Reformation. That's interesting.
It reshaped the church's power, its structure, even its...
This way.
Well, they called it a spiritual economy back then. Basically how the church dealt with sin and the afterlife.
Okay, now you've got to explain that one.
Right, so imagine you're a medieval peasant.
Peasant life, not
Yeah.
exactly a picnic.
No, definitely not. And you're constantly worried about sinning. Right. Because the afterlife, well, that's a big deal.
Heaven, hell, and in between, I guess.
Exactly, and that in between is purgatory, this waiting room where you work off your sins before you can get into heaven.
So it's not eternal damnation, but it's not paradise either.
Right. And this is where indulgences come in.
Indulgences, those were like
Spiritual coupons. You could reduce your time in purgatory by doing good deeds, going on pilgrimages, and especially,
paying the church.
bingo, paying for masses to be said for you, for your dead relatives. It was a whole system.
Like a cosmic rewards program. Sin, pay up, get closer to heaven.
Uh-huh. Yeah, kind of. And this wasn't some fringe belief. This was mainstream Christianity. Everyone bought into it.
So challenging that system, that wasn't just disagreeing with the church. It was like attacking the fabric of reality.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Luther's story so mind-blowing.
But before we get to his rebellion, we need to understand where he came from, right?
Right. And his beginnings, well, they weren't exactly glamorous. He's born in this small mining town called Eisleben.
Eisleben, not exactly Rome or Paris.
Nope. Out on the fringes of Christendom where things were a bit, well, rough around the edges.
And his dad. What was his deal?
Ambitious miner? Wanted a better life for his son, sent him off to school.
School in a mining town. What was that like?
Well, the town was steeped in apocalyptic prophecies. Imagine that.
Wow. Talk about a heavy atmosphere to grow up in.
Right. Preachers like Johann Hilton, this Franciscan monk, predicting the downfall of the papacy, the rise of a great reformer, the world ending in the 1650s. Crazy stuff.
So all this doom and gloom swirling around young Luther, what does he do? Rebels. Becomes a fiery preacher himself.
Nope. He studies law. Pretty normal path, actually.
Law. That's not what I expected. So no early signs of religious fervor.
Not really. But remember, questioning the church wasn't exactly unheard of back then. There were reform movements popping up all over the place.
Right, like the church wasn't this perfect, unchanging monolith.
Exactly. And there's this one example, this guy named Jan Hus, a scholar who lived in the early 1400s.
But Jan Hus, what did he do?
He basically said, hey, why do only the priests get to drink the wine during communion? Everyone should.
Bold move.
And he pushed for using local languages in church, not just Latin.
Sounds pretty reasonable to me, but I'm guessing the church didn't agree?
Oh no. They condemned him as a heretic and burned him at the stake in 1415.
Yikes. Talk about silencing the opposition.
Right, and that tells you a lot about how belief worked back then.
You mean like it wasn't about individual choice?
No, not really. Belief was more about accepting the shared reality, the truth that everyone agreed on.
So in that world, questioning purgatory, indulgences. That wasn't just a difference of opinion. It was like,
Like saying the Earth is flat today, you're basically challenging the whole system, the whole understanding of the universe.
okay, I'm starting to see how challenging those beliefs was a really, really big deal back then.
It was. And that's the world Martin Luther is about to step into and turn completely upside down. So it wasn't like today where, we question and debate all sorts of
Yeah,
beliefs.
everything's up for grabs now, it seems.
Right. But back then, it was more like, think about the Earth revolving around the sun. Like,
Yeah,
we all accept that as truth.
we do. Nobody's really out there arguing that the Earth is the center of the universe.
Exactly. And for people in Luther's time, things like purgatory, indulgences, all that stuff, that was part of their reality. It wasn't really up for debate.
So challenging those core beliefs would have been like, what, dropping a bomb?
Pretty much like you're shaking the foundations of their whole world.
Okay, so now we've got this backdrop of strict belief, high stakes for questioning it, and then enter Martin Luther
Right, this guy from a mining town.
with a law degree.
Yeah, not exactly the typical revolutionary.
So what was it about Luther? What made him different?
Well, the historians make this really interesting point.
Okay.
They talk about how the late 1400s, it was a really anxious time.
We talked about the plagues and the empires crumbling,
Right, all that stuff. But there was also this feeling almost like apocalyptic dread.
like the world was ending.
Yeah, exactly. The Ottomans were a huge threat. There was this syphilis epidemic ravaging Europe.
Right, and all those prophecies floating around.
Exactly. It really did feel like the end times were near.
So lots of anxiety, lots of uncertainty, and people are looking for answers, looking for something to hold on to.
Right. And that's where Luther comes in.
Okay, but how does he go from law student to, well, the guy who breaks the church?
Well, there's this story. It's pretty famous.
Oh, yeah.
So in 1505, right after he graduates from law school,
Okay.
Luther gets caught in this really bad thunderstorm.
Well, I've been in some scary storms.
Right. And this one terrifies him so much
Right.
that he makes this vow to Saint Anne,
Sam.
the patron saint of miners, and a figure his family was super devoted to.
So what? He promises to build a church? Donate money?
He vows to become a monk.
Whoa. That escalated quickly.
I know, right? From law to monastic life. Big change.
Talk about a career shift. And his family, what did they think?
His dad.
A promising legal career to join a monastery?
But Luther, he was determined.
Wow. So he enters the monastery, starts this whole new life.
Yeah, joins the Augustinian order.
The Augustinians, they were the
Super strict ones. Lots of fasting, prayer, self-reflection.
intense. Was this common back then? People having these, like, religious epiphanies?
Man, death was a lot more present in those days, right?
Sure. True, people died young, infant mortality, all that.
So yeah, maybe these kinds of life-changing moments were more common.
Okay, so Luther's in the monastery. He's seeking salvation, trying to find peace.
Yeah.
There's a but.
He starts having these intense spiritual anxieties.
What do you mean?
He's constantly worried about sin, worried that he's not doing enough to earn God's favor.
It's like all those ideas about purgatory and sin, it's really getting to him.
Exactly. He's trapped in this system where he needs the church to be saved. But it's also the source of all his anxiety.
What a dilemma.
And that's what starts to eat away at him. He begins to question the whole system, the rituals, the indulgences.
He's thinking, is this really about true faith, or is it just about rules and transactions?
Yeah, and that's the tension that builds and builds inside him.
It's like a pressure cooker.
Until finally it explodes. And that moment, it comes in 1517 when this Dominican friar named Johann Tetzel,
Okay, Johann Tetzel, who's he?
he arrives in Germany on this mission to sell indulgences.
Indulgences, like to raise money for the church.
Exactly. They were rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and they needed cash.
So they send this guy out to basically sell forgiveness.
Pretty much. And Luther, he sees this, and he is furious.
I can imagine. It's like the opposite of everything he's been wrestling with.
Totally. He sees it as this blatant exploitation of people's fears, this corruption of faith.
So what does he do?
Well, he decides he's had enough. And on October 31st, 1517.
Oh, this is the 95 Theses moment, right?
Yep. Luther nails his famous 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church.
It's like the original viral post, but with much higher stakes.
Way higher. And those 95 Theses, they basically challenge the church's whole system.
Okay, so Tetzel's out there peddling these indulgences.
There's like a spiritual salesman. Yeah.
And Luther's about to blow a gasket. This is it, the showdown we've been waiting for.
It was a clash of like totally different ways of seeing the world.
And for Luther, this isn't just about Tetzel or even the money.
Right.
It's about, like, the core of Christianity, the idea that you can't just buy your way into heaven.
Exactly. It's about grace, about faith, not about transactions.
Okay, so what does he do? Does he, like, start preaching against Tetzel? Write a letter to the Pope?
He does something way more radical.
Oh, yeah.
On October 31st, 1517, he nails his famous 95 Theses,
To the door?
the Wittenberg Castle Church.
95 Theses. That's like the original tweet storm, right?
Haha, yeah, kind of, except this one had way bigger consequences.
Okay, so what were some of the big points he was making in those theses?
Well, first of all, he questioned the Pope's authority to grant indulgences.
Okay, bold move.
Then he argued that true repentance, it's not about doing penance or paying money.
It's about a change of heart, right?
Exactly. And he also insisted that the Bible, not the church, should be the ultimate authority.
Whoa, those are some serious challenges. So how did people react?
Well, thanks to the printing press, Luther's ideas, they spread like wildfire.
Ah, the power of technology. It's like the internet of the 16th century.
Right. Within weeks, copies of the 95 Theses were all over Germany, even beyond,
People were talking about it, debating it.
in taverns, universities, everywhere.
So Luther basically tapped into this wellspring of discontent, this feeling that something was wrong with the church.
Absolutely. He gave voice to those feelings.
But the church, they're not just going to sit back and watch this happen, are they?
No way. Luther is summoned to Rome, ordered to recant his views.
I bet that was a tense meeting.
Oh, yeah. They threaten him with excommunication, but Luther...
He doesn't break down.
Nope. He insists he's just following what the Bible teaches.
Wow, standing up to the Pope, that takes some serious guts.
He was incredibly courageous. And that's basically the moment.
When the Protestant Reformation is born,
Pretty much Luther's defiance, it creates this chain reaction.
other reformers join him, right?
Yeah. And then princes and rulers, they see an opportunity to grab power from the church.
Oh, yeah, they've been wanting to do that for a while.
Right. And then ordinary people, they're tired of the corruption. They flock to Luther's message.
It's amazing how one guy questioning a few things,
Yeah.
it led to this massive upheaval.
It's like a snowball effect. A thunderstorm, a crisis of faith, a friar selling indulgences, and boom, the world changes.
History is wild, isn't it? It really makes you think about how these seemingly small events can have such massive consequences.
It really does, and it shows how important it is to understand the past.
Because it shapes who we are today.
Exactly, and that's why Luther's story, even 500 years later, it still matters.
It does. And it makes you wonder, how are we still wrestling with those same questions today? About faith, about authority, about individual freedom.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
Absolutely. Well, folks, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. It's a story that continues to echo through the centuries, shaping our world in ways we're only beginning to understand.